Please be seated. I'm not sure how many people here have seen the movie Hidden Figures. It's a fantastic movie. It came out about 10 years ago. It tells a story of three women, kind of representing a much bigger pool of women, but three black women that worked for NASA. They were mathematicians who were working with the space program in the 1960s. And it's all about the incredible work they did in spite of the discrimination and the challenges that they faced. And there's a really great scene, very powerful scene if you've seen the movie, where because it was still in the time of segregation and they had washroom for white people and washroom for colored people, one of the main characters who had been moved in and working with the NASA program itself had to walk half a mile or 800 meters just to get to the washroom. And so her boss one day confronts her in front of the entire team and says, where are you going at lunch? We need you here. And she's soaking wet, and she's frustrated, and she's tired, and she goes on this incredibly powerful tirade, essentially, about the discrimination that she's faced and how hard it is to do her work with all the systemic challenges that she's faced. Kevin Costner plays Harrison, her boss, and the look on his face is a kind of confusion and dumbfoundedness. And then he realizes what he's confronted. He's been made aware of what is going on. And there's this famous scene where he goes into the building and he knocks down the sign that says colored washrooms. And he says, from now on, this is NASA, we're all a team, we work together. Everybody uses the same bathroom, everybody drinks the same coffee. All this ends. Now, why am I telling you this story? Well, to start with, Harrison, the boss, is kind of a jerk. He doesn't mean to be a jerk, but he is until he realizes what's going on. And I think it has implications for this gospel story. And before I get into the broader context or the specific context of what we just read, it's important to get the broader context. In fact, there is a variation where we read previous to it. So a couple things to be aware of. One, Jesus, by this time, is exhausted. That is becoming clear. All he wants to do is get away and have some quiet time for himself. So much so that he goes even outside the boundaries of Judea into an area, Tyre and Sidon, which is primarily the Gentile area, quite far north. But still, there's always people around, always people asking him questions, always people challenging him. And just prior to the story we just heard, Jesus tells a parable about food, essentially, and what is pure and what is impure. And he talks about the fact that it's not about what goes in that's impure or pure, it's what comes out. And then we have the story. And I'm going to preface it by saying something that might be a bit surprising. It goes back to Harrison in the story of Hidden Figures. I don't think there's any way around this. Jesus is acting like a bit of a jerk. And that may be a bit blasphemous to say, but I don't know how we get past it. He is not being very nice to this woman right now. And there's various ways in which it gets interpreted about the use of the term dog. Is it actually meant as some kind of slur, or is he being playful? Regardless, we have this interesting dynamic if you watch the pattern that's going on. First, the woman calls out from a distance, and Jesus ignores, literally silent. She continues. The disciples say, should we just send her away? And Jesus is still at first silent. Then she comes forward, goes down on one knee and says, please help me. And that's when Jesus says the famous line, I've only been here for the people of Israel. And then he makes the throwaway line about food for dogs. And obviously a pretty quick woman says, well, at least the dogs get the scraps from under the table sometime. And then Jesus says, great is your faith. Now, many theologians have challenged this passage because they're not sure what to do with it, because we have what it seems to be a very human Jesus being very uncharitable. My mom is theologically trained. She was in seminary in the early 1980s. She didn't get ordained, but she has her master's in theology. And I remember her telling me about this story, that she believed that what's going on here is that Jesus, who is fully divine yet fully human, may be having a learning experience himself. And if we compare it, if we think about it, and we tie it to the previous passage about what's pure and what's impure, I wonder if Jesus himself is going, ooh, kind of blew it on this one. So what do we make of this? Well, I think there's three things to take away from this passage. The first one, it's a fairly simple one. We talk a lot about Jesus' divinity. I think it's not such a bad thing to remind ourselves of Jesus' full humanity, because without his full humanity, the whole story of his death and resurrection, the whole Holy Week and Easter story, doesn't really work if he doesn't truly experience suffering. And if he can truly experience suffering, then he can experience exhaustion, he can experience hunger, he can experience frustration, and perhaps that is what we're seeing in this passage. That there is a growth going on within Jesus himself. And if Jesus can learn and grow, then most certainly so can we. The second thing about this passage, which I think, and this is the much more important thing, is about hearing voices from the edges. And that's what Hidden Figures is about, voices from the edges that want to move to the center. One such voice in our society, in Canadian history, is a woman by the name of Cindy Blackstock. And a little bit about her. Her father was a member of the Gitxsan Nation. She received her master's in management at McGill University, as well as a master's of jurisprudence, so it's kind of like a law degree from Loyola in Chicago. And she had her PhD in social work at the University of Toronto, a very, very capable woman. And she witnessed the injustices of children, of Indigenous children around Canada, whether they were put into foster care, poor treatment, in so many different ways. And so she formed the Caring Society. And as an Indigenous woman, despite all her incredible credentials, she was often pushed to the outside, just like the Syrophoenician woman we heard about in that story. But she kept pushing, and she kept pushing, and she kept pushing. The Caring Society, which she founded, sued the government in 2007. And after 9 long years, they won their case. In 2023, after 6 more years, they finally got the compensation of $23 billion to make reparations. And what specifically was it about? Well, it's something called Jordan's Principle. And Jordan was a young boy who was part of the Norway First Nation in Manitoba. And he was very sick. And any of us who are parents here, we would know if our child was sick, we would do whatever we could to try to help them. And we believe we have a system in Canada which will help them. Well, he got sicker and sicker and sicker. The federal government argued with the provincial government over who was going to pay the bills. And he got sicker and he died. And that's what instigated Cindy Blackstock's initiation for this. Because there were so many other children like Jordan, and she believed that we no longer should never have children like Jordan in this situation. This passage is a reminder for us to sometimes be the voice, but also to look for the voices in our world that are speaking, particularly from the fringes and from the edges, that may not have an easy time getting their voice heard. And then there's a final thing. This passage from Matthew's Gospel, in fact, all of Matthew chapter 15, is all about crossing boundaries in a good way. Jesus, in order to get away, crosses the boundaries from Judea, primarily Israelite land, into Gentile land. The woman crosses boundaries to help her child. It takes Jesus a while to realize what's going on here, but the most powerful thing that happens is at that end, when these boundaries are crossed in a good way, to make our society more just and more good and more representing God's kingdom. So we need to listen to those voices in our world, and we need to find those boundaries that need to be crossed so that we can be more just, more compassionate, and more empathetic. One of the things that we talk about at Appleby College a lot is the concept of belonging, and I think belonging and inclusivity is a fantastic value to have. But even something like belonging has its limitations. Sometimes belonging becomes so entrenched in one group that they start inadvertently to push against other groups in their desire to belong to one group. And we've seen this in hate groups and various organizations around the world. It is okay to sense of belonging in something, but sometimes we need to take that belonging and cross that boundary into other areas of our world. This passage is a reminder for us that we all have scope to learn and to grow. We all have to listen for the voices in our world that are crying out for justice. And if it need be, sometimes to cross those boundaries to make sure that that justice is experienced in our communities and in our world. Amen.